Hello everyone, welcome to another episode on Content Hub. Today we will be dealing with tropical cyclones. Now firstly we need to establish what are tropical cyclones. Our tropical cyclones, these are intense low pressure weather systems that moves from east to west. The tropical cyclones, unlike mid-latitude cyclone that moves from west to east, our tropical cyclones, they move in an opposite direction. They move from east to west in a westward direction. Let us write it down. They move westwards. This is to say they are moving from the east all the way to the west. Now, I hear you asking, but why are tropical cyclones moving in a westward direction? Now, like I said on the previous video, we always need to go back and refer to our grade 11 knowledge. The global air circulation. This diagram, you should always keep it in your mind. Now, when you look at this diagram that shows us the different wind belts as you learned in grade 11. Between 0 and 30 degree latitude, this is where we find our tropical easterlies. And between 30 and 60 degree latitude, this is where we find our subtropical westerlies, the ones that are influencing the mid-latitude cyclones. But for this lesson, since we are dealing with tropical cyclone, our interest lies on this band. Our interest lies in this wind belt, whereby we find our tropical easterlies. Now, when you need to identify or when you need to explain the area of origin of the tropical cyclones, where do they actually develop? You will be saying that our tropical cyclones, they develop between 0 and 30 degree latitude, but they form from 5 degrees and 30 degrees. Now, our tropical cyclones, they form between 5 degrees to 30 degrees latitude in either hemisphere. Now, in this wind belt, this is where we find our tropical easterlies. Now, because these winds, the easterlies, remember, in geography, we refer to the winds or we name our winds based from where they are coming from. Now, the name easterlies will signify that this wind is coming from the east and it is heading towards the west. As a result, our tropical cyclone, since it is found in this wind belt between 0 and 30 degree latitude, these tropical easterlies are going to drive our cyclone to move from the east all the way to the west. Why are tropical cyclones moving from east to west? They move from east to west because they are under the influence of tropical easterlies. Now, as you move all around the world, these tropical cyclones, they are being referred to with different names. For example, when you go to North America, they use the term hurricanes to refer to tropical cyclones. When you go to Asia, they use the term typhoons. And when you go to Oceania, this includes areas or countries such as Australia, such as New Zealand or Guinea Papua. Those areas, they refer to tropical cyclones as willy willies. But you should not be confused. All of these different names, they all come back to the tropical cyclones. Now, sometimes in an examination, they can use these names as a form of a clue that will tell you about the hemisphere where these cyclones are taking place. When they use the term hurricane, then it is more likely to say that this cyclone is occurring in the northern hemisphere, since North America is located in that region. When they use the term Typhoon Lee, for example, or Typhoon Joshua, since it is in Asia, then you know that these areas is more likely occurring in the northern hemisphere. But once we use tropical cyclone Freddy, for example, then you know that this tropical cyclone, it is occurring in the southern hemisphere. Now let us try and discuss further the characteristics of the tropical cyclone. All right, moving on. The characteristics of the tropical cyclone. Now we have already established that our tropical cyclones, they form between 5 degrees and 30-degree latitude. But we need to understand, when do these cyclones occur? Our cyclones, unlike mid-latitude cyclones that occurs all year around and affecting our country in winter, the tropical cyclones occurs late summer, early autumn. It means that by the time this video is going to drop, this is the time when we are more likely to be experiencing tropical cyclones. Because this late summer, early autumn includes the months such as December, January, February, March. Now, those are the months that when we say late summer, early autumn, we refer to those dates. Now, let us move on. Since this is a pressure system, it means that there is circulation of air around this low pressure system. And it is important since it gives you a clue to be able to identify the hemisphere where this tropical cyclone is occurring. Now, when you look at the air circulation around a low pressure system of the tropical cyclone, once the air circulates in a clockwise direction, then that will signify that this tropical cyclone is occurring in the southern hemisphere. But the circulation of air is in a counterclockwise or anti-clockwise. This will signify that now this tropical cyclone is occurring in the northern hemisphere. The difference in the circulation of air in these hemispheres, it is due to the Coriolis force. Since the Coriolis force deflects winds to the right in the northern hemisphere and to the left in the southern hemisphere. As a result, the circulation of air will be different in both hemispheres. Let us look at these diagrams. These two diagrams of mine signifies tropical cyclone occurring in different hemispheres. When you look at this diagram, the air circulates, remember, it circulates toward the center, since this is a low pressure system. So the air converges at the center of the low pressure system. So you are going to see this clockwise circulation of air to signify that this is in the southern hemisphere. And in the northern hemisphere, the difference now is that the air will still converge towards the area of low pressure, but now it converges in an anti-clockwise direction. It circulates around a low pressure system in an anti-clockwise direction. Please be able to see this difference. Clockwise circulation, the southern hemisphere, and anti-clockwise in the northern hemisphere. We are good. Let us continue. Now, our tropical cyclones, because they can occur one after another. Now, we need to be able to track the number of cyclones that have occurred in a season. So what do? We name our tropical cyclones, we name them alphabetically. When we say alphabetically, it is to say that we are going to use alphabets to help us identify the number of tropical cyclones that have occurred in a season during late summer, early autumn. Now let us look how are we going to be able to identify these. Now, this system that we use to name our tropical cyclones alphabetically, let us look at how it is going to apply in a real world situation. How are we going to be able to track the number of tropical cyclones that have occurred? Now, we know that our alphabets in order, we start with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all the way up until alphabet Z. Now, alphabet A, it is the first alphabet. Alphabet D, the fourth. Alphabet E, the fifth. And alphabet F, let us include it also, will be the sixth alphabet. Now, during that season when we are experiencing tropical cyclones, late summer, early autumn, the first tropical cyclone that is going to occur, we are going to award it a name that starts with the alphabet A, because it is easier for us to remember that when we see the name of the cyclone and the name starts with the letter A, it signifies that this is the first cyclone to occur in a season. For example, tropical cyclone Ana, followed by the second tropical cyclone once Ana has passed. Tropical cyclone Batserai. Tropical cyclone Batserai, I think this cyclone hit Madagascar sometime in 2023. The third tropical cyclone that will follow, we give it the name that starts with C. Tropical cyclone Carol. Then followed by the most recently, the one that hit Madagascar, tropical cyclone Dikeledi. Tropical cyclone Dikeledi. You may remember some few years ago we had tropical cyclone Dineo. It is to say that this tropical cyclone, it is the fourth cyclone to occur in this season. We can have tropical cyclone Eloise, that will be our fifth tropical cyclone. Last year we had tropical cyclone Freddy that destroyed a lot of homes and killed some people, unfortunately. So this system, it is easier for us to remember. The first tropical cyclone in a season will be awarded the name that starts with an A, and then the third tropical cyclone in a season will be awarded the letter C, Carol, Clark, and so on. And then the 20th tropical cyclone, if it ever reaches that point, the 20th tropical cyclone, letter T, then this will be named after me, of course, tropical cyclone Tato. Then you'll know that this is the most violent, most destructive tropical cyclone that will ever be recorded in the world. But otherwise, let us continue. But our tropical cyclones, they do not just come out of nowhere. We need the ingredients. Like when you cook in the kitchen, for you to end up having a particular meal, you will need the ingredients. Without one of those ingredients, that meal will never turn out to be as perfect as you'd want it to be. So, how do we do this? We have conditions. Now, speaking about the conditions necessary for the formation of tropical cyclones. Now, it is important to remember that these conditions, in order for the tropical cyclone to form, they need to be present over the oceans for several days. Not few hours, but for several days. Then we can have our recipe for disaster. Also, remember that when the tropical cyclone forms, this occurs during late summer and early autumn. By that time, the sun is focused directly on top of the Tropic of Capricorn, which is located right around 23.5 degrees south. So when the sun is focused more on the Tropic of Capricorn, it means that the southern hemisphere receives more insolation from the sun, which now means that our oceans will now receive more heat, and as a result, temperature starts to rise more higher in our oceans. Hence, we are going to have sea temperatures of about 26.5 degrees Celsius, or at least temperatures that are above 27 degrees Celsius, as you may read in other books. Now, these sea temperatures of above 26.5 degrees Celsius coupled with warm oceans. This will make sure that we are going to have more latent heat that is going to be released, more latent heat that is going to be released from the rate of evaporation that will be occurring as a result of the high temperatures recorded over the oceans. Now, our tropical cyclones, for the circulation of air to occur, for the formation of a vortex, that circulation of air will need an active Coriolis force. Remember, we said that our tropical cyclones, they form between 5 to 30 degrees, either north or south of the equator. But when you talk about the Coriolis force, the Coriolis force is inactive or it is not present at the equator. This is around 0 to 4 degrees Celsius. So when the tropical cyclone occurs at 5 degrees and 30 degrees Celsius, this is where we are having an active Coriolis force. Therefore, this will make it possible for the circulation of air around the tropical cyclone. And the tropical cyclone also will start to move from east to west in a southwesterly direction. This is to make sure that it moves away from the weak Coriolis force, but it goes towards a region of more higher Coriolis force. Hence, our tropical cyclone will continue to get stronger and stronger. And our tropical cyclone, since it moves over the oceans, over water, the surface friction there needs to be very low. As a result, it will enable our tropical cyclone to move smoothly as it heads westwards. And remember that when we have warm air with sea temperatures of above 26.5 degrees Celsius, this means that we are going to have more rising air. Now, when we have more rising air, remember that we say that in the lowest layer of the atmosphere, the troposphere, the higher you go, the colder it becomes. So this air, as it continues to rise higher and higher in the atmosphere, it reaches the level higher in the troposphere, and as a result, it starts to diverge. It starts to diverge. Where it diverges, this is to make sure that this same air that diverges will cool down and as a result starts to sink back towards the surface, undergoing adiabatic heating to make sure that it maintains the low pressure system that is at the surface. Then we have convergence of air around the surface. This air will continue to rise and rise and rise, leading to the formation of cumulonimbus clouds that will later bring about precipitation. Not just any precipitation, but torrential rainfall coupled with strong winds that are most likely to lead to storm surges. Guys, it's cool. Please. But let us continue. When these conditions are present and they can last for several days, then we have our tropical cyclone in a stage whereby it can start to form. But once our tropical cyclone have formed, now it is going to go through different stages, starting with the initial stage, which is also called the formative stage, continuing into the immature stage, mature, before our tropical cyclone reaches the decaying stage, also known as the dissipating stage. Now, what is important for you to remember in all of these stages is how the pressure changes in each of these stages. In the formative stage, you still have your pressure reading that is still above 1,000 hectopascals. And when you look at your synoptic weather map, you're going to see your isobars around the low pressure system further away from each other, signifying a weak pressure gradient. And as a result, the winds around the system in the formative stage, you'll see that they are very weak. They are not strong winds. At this stage, it is not very clear for us to be able to see an area which is at the center of the tropical cyclone that is known as the eye. But continuing into the immature stage, pressure starts to fall below 1,000 hectopascals, and your isobars will start to get closer and closer to each other, increasing the wind speed of the tropical cyclone. At this time, then we can start to see our vortex that will lead to the formation of the eye. We can start to see the vortex or the circulation of air that will lead to the development of the eye. Please note that pressure here will still be below 1,000 but above 950 hectopascals. The moment that pressure falls below 950 hectopascals and it no longer continues to fall, then our tropical cyclone has now entered the mature stage, which is the most violent destructive stage of the tropical cyclone. We will talk about this stage later on. Now, our dissipating stage, this is when our tropical cyclone starts to lose its speed. It starts to slow down. But we need to understand the factors that makes our tropical cyclone to slow down. What causes it to weaken? Remember, our tropical cyclone will enter the dissipating stage regardless of how strong this cyclone may be. The moment our tropical cyclone makes landfall, which means the moment it touches the land, then we are going to say this tropical cyclone has now entered the dissipating stage. What is on the land that is weakening our tropical cyclone? Over the land, there is no warm oceans. Over the land, temperatures may be lower than those over the oceans. Over the land, there is more surface friction, which is going to slow down our tropical cyclone. There is no moisture, therefore, it means that the level of latent heat available over the land is very low. As a result, our tropical cyclone starts to lose momentum and eventually it dies out. Now let us look at the cross-section of a tropical cyclone in its mature stage and try to understand the conditions that are prevailing at the center of the tropical cyclone, an area that is known as the eye. So let us look at this next diagram. Now what we have here is the cross-section of a tropical cyclone in its mature stage. In the mature stage, we can see a clearly defined area of the eye present at the center of the tropical cyclone. Now, when you look at this diagram, here we are having warm air that is rising and we have our upper air divergence that is going to sink, continuing to feed more air to the low pressure system to make sure that our tropical cyclone is well sustained. Now, continuous warm air that is rising will lead to the formation of this giant cumulonimbus cloud that will later bring heavy rainfall, or you can just say torrential rainfall that is coupled with thunderstorms as well as storm surges. Now, when these conditions occur, they occur at an area that we call the eye wall. The eye wall. The eye wall, it is this region. This region surrounding the eye. We call it the eye wall. And this is where the most violent conditions of the tropical cyclones are found. But right at the center of the tropical cyclone, at a region that we refer to as the eye, here we do not have any warm air that is rising, but rather we are having high pressure zone above this area whereby we start to have sinking air. Now, sinking air opposes condensation. Therefore, at the eye, the conditions recorded at the eye will be completely different from the conditions recorded at the eye wall. At the eye wall, we said we have torrential rainfall coupled with strong winds as well as your storm surges. But at the eye, the conditions are completely different. So when you say at the eye there are clear skies, at the eye there are clear skies since air is sinking in this area. We are having temperatures that are higher. At the eye, we have warm temperatures. Temperatures are higher at the eye. And at the eye, since at the eye wall we have recorded strong winds, at the eye we do not experience strong winds, but rather we experience calm winds. At the eye, we experience calm winds. And since there are no clouds or there are scattered clouds around the eye, the rate of precipitation occurring here will be very low. Hence, we are experiencing no rainfall at the eye. So when they ask you to discuss the conditions recorded at the eye and the conditions recorded around the eye, these are two completely different questions. Conditions at the eye, you start to tell us that here we are having sinking air that leads to clear skies. We have no rainfall, temperatures are high, and at the eye wall, which means the area immediately next to the eye, this is where you have your most violent conditions, and then you discuss that. Please make sure that you read that question with a full understanding. Now, when these conditions are prevailing over an area, this can have a serious negative impact over the environment as well as on the social welfare of people. We can have people being affected by this tropical cyclone since it consists of strong winds. This may damage the infrastructure of people. Make sure that it brings down the power lines. It may even lead to the death of the livestock of people. But on the environment, it has the capabilities of making sure that it causes floods, since this may lead to the storm surges. It may cause soil erosion, and then you start to think about those areas. And I know that when you are studying, you have studied the conditions, yes, the conditions or the impacts of the mid-latitude cyclone on the environment as well as on people. You try to think along those regions. Strong rainfall have the ability of causing soil erosion. Strong rainfall has the ability of leading microorganisms to migrate. Those are the reasons or the answers that we are looking for when you are talking about the impact of tropical cyclones on people. But what is most of importance is what can the government or what can we do to make sure we reduce the impact of tropical cyclone. Remember that we cannot prevent these. These are natural disasters. What we can only have is to put measures in place to make sure that we reduce the impact of tropical cyclones. Now let us look at those strategies that we can try to mitigate. You are faced with a tropical cyclone in an era whereby you are faced with death right in front of your eyes. You should be knowing what to do in that time. And only the government has the power to make sure that everybody is well prepared to face the disaster, either individually or as a pack. Now, let us look at these strategies, some of the strategies that we can try to implement. Firstly, we may use remote sensing. If you recall in your GIS, your map work, remote sensing, it is whereby we collect information about the Earth from a distance. Now, these systems, they are able to assist us to be able to track the movement or the possible path of the tropical cyclone so that we may prioritize areas that need more help as opposed to others. These remote sensing, they can help us to make sure that we plan well our evacuation procedures. Which areas are we going to move to safety? And which areas are most likely not to be affected by the tropical cyclones. But once we have detected the possible path of the tropical cyclone, the first thing that also we need to do is to make sure that we warn, we alert people on time to make sure that anybody who needs to get to a place of safety, they may do so while there is still ample time. Also, we can try to implement some educational campaigns whereby we teach people about the dangers of the tropical cyclones. We teach people what to do in time of a disaster. This includes things like advising them to make sure that they stay indoors, they stay away from their windows and doors, since they may be affected by any flying debris from the strong tropical cyclones. It also continues to say that we can also stock on essentials. when we stock on essentials, these are important things. This include your food or any your medical supplies. Make sure that you prepare your first aid kits in case somebody gets injured. You make sure that you stock on your non-perishable foods. This normally they say the canned food, since they last for a longer time, so that it can be able to sustain you during the period of the tropical cyclone. And we can have some emergency teams. Emergency teams, normally these teams will be able to assist during and after the tropical cyclone. After the tropical cyclones, these people they dispatch to the scene to make sure that they look for any people that may be hurt or injured during the time of the storm, so that they may be able to offer them assistance. Emergency teams, this will be people that make sure that they provide medical care. These people, they will be the teams that will provide people with shelter that have lost their homes. So make sure that we prepare our emergency team before the arrival of the tropical cyclones. Another one, sandbags. Now, sandbags, once they are placed along the coast, along our rivers, they prevent possible flooding. They prevent possible flooding that may wipe away a lot of people, including our livestock, and causing soil erosion. Now, please make sure that you expand on top of these tropical cyclone strategies that we can implement. There are a lot of them, but we are obviously not going to discuss all of them because we are working with time. But otherwise, from me, Super Teacher, Mr. Mulangeni from Content Hub, Bona. Until next time.
I tried to give you all my world.